started. The recording now is in progress. So this is the May Lunch and Learn for the Washington chapter of NIGP, and we're happy to welcome SOVRA here. They're going to be talking about from manual to modern, 6 stages of the public maturity mode. And I actually took this back in last summer at NIGP. It was one of the optional vendor provided sessions, and I thought it was really good. So I hope you guys get as many takeaways as I did. But before we get into that, we have a few of our traditional reminders that we need to provide. So for those of you, just remember to go ahead and mute. And if you're going to want credit for this particular class, make sure that you put your full name in the on your screen, because we need to be able to correlate that to the registration to give you the credit. So if that's something that if you're not a Zoom person, remember all you have to do is right click on your video and choose rename, and you can go ahead and do that. So the other piece that we wanted to do was when we have questions, go ahead and raise your hand, or you can enter it into chat. Jeannette said that she would go ahead and after each session kind of take a look at that and be able to answer those questions after each one of her little modules there. So we'll be able to do that then. So. And then to kind of talk about what's coming up here at our local chapter, it says March No Lunch and Learn. I think that's left over from before. However, just a reminder for those of you who do join us regularly, we will not have Lunch and Learns in July and August. We do have one coming up in June, and we'll get into that here in a second. But we do have our Regional Area 8 conference. That registration is closed, but if you decide and just got last minute opportunity to join, go ahead and email the IPPA folks, and they will actually go behind the scenes and get you logged in and get you registered. So join us over in Idaho. We do have another class coming up on market analysis and forecasting. We'd love to see more people into that class. And that's on June 2nd. And then on June 5th, it's not on here, but sorry, June 4th, we have from about cloud procurement. Amazon's going to come talk to us about doing procurement for software as a service. So that'll be really interesting. Make sure you mark your calendars for that. July 8th, we have a new member orientation. And then July 1st, we've got another class on sourcing and contracting methods. Both of those are online, the June 2nd and the August 1st. And then for those of you who are baseball fans, our annual Mariners Family and Friends Night will be Friday, August 22nd. Registration's not up yet, but it will be up soon. And then we have 2 more classes in September, relationship management. And then in October, we've got the contract management and performance. So we've got a lot more information at the link that's shown on the slide there below. So with that, I would like to introduce Jeannette Bruno from SOVRA. Jeannette has over 13 years of experience managing complex projects, conducting program evaluations, and leading change management initiatives in the public and nonprofit sectors. She has over 8 years of public service experience. She joined SOVRA from the federal service at the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs and GSA's IT Modernization Centers of Excellence, where she managed several large-scale IT modernization efforts at federal agencies to help employees embrace new ways of working. She has worked with the Federal CIO Council and CIOs at federal agencies to imagine more resilient futures for their organization. Prior to federal service, she worked in procurement and IT modernization in the city of Philadelphia. Jeannette is a certified federal coach specializing in navigating change, an SHRM certified professional, and one of the U.S. federal government's only certified forensic foresight practitioners. So with that, Jeannette, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Wanted to talk a little bit about why maturity models matter. In a lot of my work, particularly at GSA's IT Modernization Centers of Excellence, we worked collaboratively to build many different types of maturity models. But essentially, why these are so important is that they can very quickly provide some clarity for you all in a systematic way around your current state. They can really help you do things like set goals or key performance indicators, really help with that change management buy-in that you might need from executives or other sponsors in your organization, and help give you a little bit of a roadmap for where you might need to take your modernization strategy. Truthfully, this is something I wish existed when I was doing this work many years ago in the city of Philadelphia, because I had to painstakingly review all of our processes very manually, doing multiple current state assessments to really figure out where our gap areas were at the city and where we wanted to focus our efforts for procurement. So something I wish that we had, and you'll have an opportunity. We're going to share out the assessment later. So if you haven't taken it, really, I highly encourage you to do so. But as we used to say in Philly, procurement is truly the backbone of city government. And so really thinking about modernization in this space particularly is incredibly imperative, especially now with the things going as they are at the federal level, and with all the changes and uncertainty that we expect. Really thinking about ways to very quickly assess where you are and what it might take for you to go to the next level is really what this presentation about, and what we hope to kind of achieve through our public procurement maturity model. So with that, I want to kind of jump through the next slide here and keep going through and really walk you through the procurement maturity model. So this is really a journey. You may be at any one of these levels, or perhaps even between stages here. And really, this is a strategic tool, not just a pathway, but really a tool that helps us understand where we are and where we may need to go as we're thinking about modernizing our procurement processes. And so in today's presentation, we're going to dive into each of these stages and really talk about what it means to be in that stage, what it might look like, some challenges you may be experiencing in that stage, and then what it will really take to think about moving to that next level of maturity. And so we're going to go through all of that. But before we do so, I think on my next slide, I have a poll for you all, and I will beg for you to use the chat here. And just based on the description that is on the slide, I'm really curious to hear from you all sort of how you would rank the level of procurement maturity that your organization currently is. And again, this is a judgment-free zone. This is not meant to catch you unaware. We're just sort of trying to feel out where you all are. So are you in that basic? Are you developing? Are you a little bit transitional, but maybe between two stages? So I'm gonna look in the chat here. I'm seeing a couple of threes, seeing a 3.5. I love a good 0.5 here. Leaving a 4 and hesitantly entering a 5. Victor, I really love that. 3 seems to be our common sort of area here, maybe with like a 3.54 is our next one. So it sounds like you are already past kind of the lower levels of the maturity model in that mid kind of tier, which is really, really great. So we'll kind of talk about a little bit more about this. So jumping into the next slide, I want to kind of start from the very beginning. So what does it mean to be in what we call the basic sort of level of the maturity model, or stage 1? So this sort of bucket is primarily where your procurement is mostly manual. So paper-based documentation, manual tendering, very basic vendor management. It's a starting point, and it's a starting point that I'm not sad to say that the city of Philadelphia was not too long ago at this starting point, even for being quite a big city here. So it is definitely a starting point for many, many folks. But as we all know, if you've been working in this space for a long time, really fraught with challenges, lots of human error, really time-consuming document management. It is quite challenging to do internally to manage when you're entirely manual. I would also say, from a lot of the work that I've done with the vendor community here in Philly, it's also a process that is entirely onerous on your vendors and suppliers and folks that you're looking to work with. So really, this is the beginning, but there's only more up that you can go when you're starting in stage 1. And so really thinking about how to move past this stage is really thinking about what documents or processes you might be able to digitize, what kind of basic tools you may have access to kind of level up and take the next step here. Really thinking about building your case for change here. I'm a change management professional, both by experience and by training. And so really, this is where you might want to start thinking about, what will it take? Who do you need to get involved? What kind of buy-in do you need to start thinking about here? What are some easy processes or easy documents that you could maybe digitize, even if it's very low level, not very, high cost tools that you may already have in your enterprise suite to just move to the next level here. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as we get to stage 2. But I think the real challenges here are it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of potential for error. It can feel really hard to streamline processes. I did this work in Philly and trying to just track down and map all of our manual processes for every different type of procurement that we did and the ways that each department fit in and just the lack of standardization that we had. It was entirely really challenging to kind of map this work in a manual process just so we could assess where we were and where some of our quick wins could be. So going to the next slide, I think in stage 2, this is where we start to see a little bit of introduction of some technology. So again, primarily this is around document digitization, sort of storing your documents, retrieving documents. Certainly a step up from stage 1, but really comes with its own set of challenges. So sort of dependency on more rudimentary digital systems, lots of resistance to change. I tell the story about who is now one of my good friends, Bob, but Bob was a person that I really had to cultivate a deep relationship with so I could get him to let go a little bit of his desire to keep the city's very long tenured manual processes in some of these spaces. But this is really where you start to see some change resistance for folks who've been working and they've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years, and they think the process works great for them. You will have a little bit of an uphill battle to try to get people to really think about what it looks like to even digitize only a portion of the process or only a piece of this process. So there is going to be quite a lot of work that has to be done in the change management space here, even if you're starting to just introduce these very rudimentary solutions. Thinking about moving to stage 3, what you have to really think about is some of that. What are those processes or what are those pieces of the process that maybe lend themselves to automation? What might it look like if we expanded a little bit out from some of our basic tools to tools that are a little bit more enterprise level or things that would allow us to do a little bit more? Really thinking about not only what could you automate, but then sort of that pitch to start to build that what's in it for me for some of your key stakeholders about like, if you automated this piece of the process, what do you do with that time savings? How do you leverage those staff more strategically because you're able to reduce some of that workload? Where do you put that work in a way that still supports your organization's vision and mission? So that's kind of just stage 2 in a nutshell. We move on to stage 3. This is where I know many of you seem to be, but sort of you're in this transitional stage. So you've left those basic levels of the maturity model, kind of in that in-between stage. You're doing some generic systems. You're leveraging generic systems. So you maybe have an ERP, they may be aligned differently with procurement needs. There may be some integration challenges that you have to navigate and work through here. But the focus here is less about kind of process and really because you're in a system, even if it's not a system that's purpose-built for procurement, you're starting to think a little bit about what that data visibility and informed decision-making may look like and how you use technology and the tools within technology to really understand specific problems and figure out where you may need to make additional investment. From a change management lens, this is also sort of where you should be thinking about building up your kind of champion network, your folks across the enterprise who may want to be supporting you all in doing a modernization effort, really involving them early and often to really talk to them about why adapting a new system or making some improvements on the current system is important. We talk a lot about training in this presentation, and I think from a change management perspective, this is sometimes like something that folks consider a one and done opportunity, but I would say it's really important, especially as you proceed through the maturity model and you're developing not just more maturity in the way that you're operating, but in some of the tools, technologies, and platforms that you're introducing, is to figure out what it looks like for you to bring other folks along who need to use these solutions so that you're not just, trying to muddle.
Yeah, I got to do a lunch and learn at lunch, so
I think we got a hot mic there.
maybe grab me some yakisoba or something.
Thank you. So really thinking about not just the tools themselves, but also the training that may need to be rolled out to procurement staff, to folks who work in other departments or parts of your agency who really need to understand the parts of the system that they're interacting with, is really, really key. And as you continue to build up more advanced features, that training and that culture of continuous learning is one that you'll want to grow and really nurture as you go. As we move into stage 4, we're progressing up to the next level, more enhanced here. So still sort of that mid-tier, but you are shifting into more purpose-built solutions. So those are providing more scalable and customizable workflows. They may be better addressing the needs of procurement, but the downside is that they may require ongoing updates and customization. So at this stage of the maturity model, this is where kind of figuring out what it looks like to foster a culture of innovation on your team is going to be really, really important. Thinking about things like expanding the use of analytics across all areas of procurement, really starting to be smarter about not just the data that you're capturing, but how you're crunching that data, how you're using that data to inform decision-making in the procurement space, and really start looking for some of those holistic solutions that offer full source to pay or source to contract or procure to pay capabilities. So you're taking that step up. It's not just a generic system, but it's a system that's built with procurement in mind. What does it mean to do an end-to-end process from a procurement standpoint in the system? What are some things that you need? What are some things that, some challenges you may need to overcome as you do that? Again, this is where I always harp on my Change Champion network. I can't speak enough about how some of the folks that I worked with, both doing specific procurement modernization at the city and then doing lots of higher level IT modernization for, entire agencies at the federal level, having those champions who are really keen on engaging in this effort, who can help influence others and help you build buy-in and build your case for change and be your microphones in other departments is entirely necessary for the success of any modernization effort that you may be undergoing. So again, in this stage, you are reaching a higher level of maturity, but there are still limitations and challenges here. So some of the procurement features may be basic or may not have the level of sophisticated functionality that you deem necessary to really make that next step in your procurement operational growth. There may be limited data and reporting capabilities. There may be a need for continuous updates and customization to keep up with the changing requirements, which we know, as we've seen in the last few months, lots of changing requirements coming down the line, and changes to some of our operational pieces as a result of what's happening at the federal level. And then really advancing to this next stage, how you move beyond this stage is really starting to think about that holistic. What does it look like for a source to contract, procure to pay? What does it look like for us to tackle multiple parts of this ecosystem? How do we use analytics differently to really look across all areas of procurement, really report smartly on it, and use some of that data to drive our decision making? And really, as we're doing that and as we're engaging in modernization, making sure that we're cultivating and building the interest of our champions so that when we're rolling things out, they can serve as our advocates. They can help, even do things like peer-to-peer training, and certainly how we've leveraged a lot of Change Champion networks that I worked with in federal service is, kind of empowering those train the trainer type model for people to bring things back to their program office or their department office or their, piece of the agency. As we move into stage 5, we are now kind of in that highest tier of the maturity model. So this is, really where we're starting to see an advanced integrated e-procurement process. So this is a much more mature stage of procurement where processes across the board are really highly automated, very tailored to the needs that your organization has. And the key here is having to balance and kind of manage that complexity of fully integrated systems. So there may be a lot at play here. There may be a lot of integrations. You may have a specific specific e-procurement solution that has to play nicely with your ERP. So there's a lot of work here in making sure all those integrations work and all the data is synced and systems are speaking to each other. But there's also quite a lot of work here in continuing improvement. So this is where we're going to start to talk about that culture of continuous improvement. You may be at a really high functional level, but you need to continue to think about what it looks like to keep things updated or to keep up with either emerging trends that we'll talk about soon, or keep up with changes in policy or in legislation that you may need to embed in here. This is also where you really want to make sure that all of your stakeholders who need to engage in the system are really proficient and feel like they have the knowledge, skills, and ability to utilize all of the advanced features in the system. You know, part of why you're in this integrated place is because it offers a ton of data. It offers you a 360 picture of what's going on. It helps you be more strategic in your decision making. So really making sure that everyone who needs to engage feels confident in how they engage with those advanced features is really, really important. And at this level, you know, the next stage up to kind of get to is really thinking about that culture of continuous improvement, that culture of collaboration, and really thinking about how you kind of manage and muddle through some of the emerging trends that will become less and less emerging as we proceed on. So this is where sort of the AI piece kind of comes in here. So in stage 6, your processes and procurement isn't only optimized, but really strategically aligned with organizational goals. So this is all about maintaining agility and continuous innovating to adapt to new trends. And so I will take a segue side note here to say that this is a space that I've spent quite a lot of time working with federal agencies and staff within federal agencies on, because I think when you reach a level of maturity where the system is really working, the system's giving you really great data and insights, people are using the system and have adopted the system as you have intended, you're really reaping a lot of those like time savings, cost savings benefits. The sort of, it's more of a culture change in how you work to make sure that as new things are happening, you are able to quickly pivot and you're able to quickly kind of manage through those changes without losing any of the momentum that you may have spent many years building to get to this level of maturity. So again, really embracing what it looks like to work agilely, to work in sort of like, hey, how will we tackle this challenge? Like, let's build this in, or here's where we might be able to build it in. Really trying to stay at the forefront of some of those trends, really trying to think about, hey, like this AI is rolling out. What does that mean for me? How does my solution that I'm utilizing kind of address that? How do we leverage it even more or differently? And what might that mean for our processes internally? Do things need to shift and change? If so, how? Who needs to be involved? So a lot of the work that you've spent going up through this maturity in the procurement space on the people side of it, so really building that champion network, really building those collaborative engagements with folks, really making sure that you are investing in kind of getting that executive level of buy-in. All of that work really pays off here, because as you may need to be nimble as things continue to change, you have the structures in place to be able to adapt and be nimble. So this stage is really about the cycle of improvement. There's really not an end. Once you're in a stage 6, you're fully optimized. You only continue to iterate on being fully optimized and continuing to evolve to meet and exceed those modern procurement standards. So the work doesn't really end. That's sort of the takeaway here. The work really, really continues beyond this. And the work that you may have taken in other stages of the procurement maturity model really allow you to be resilient in this stage. So I've been talking for a few minutes, and I think on my next slide, I have an open-ended question. I haven't seen anything come in the chat, but I am curious from this audience here, about 32 folks, if anyone has recently undertaken a modernization initiative, and if so, if you have any advice or sort of thoughts that you'd like to share out. Victor, I see a hand up. Go for it.
Thank you. Just mentioning that we are in the stages of implementing a new ERP system. Looking back at all the stages previously, what I would strongly encourage is not reinventing the wheel, but reaching out to peers, even consultants, in regards to really defining what your needs are And then reaching out to those that are on stages ahead of you saying, if you could go back in time, what are my blind spots? What are questions I should ask? What research should I do? And then if you are leaning towards a particular contractor, provider, really vet them and reach out to those that are using them and ask for a demonstration. Or again, did marketing sell this to you, or did you buy it with full knowledge of what you were getting and, more importantly, what you weren't getting with the new system?
I love that, Victor. Other thoughts from folks? I'm happy to take sort of thoughts in the chat, or if you want to be brave and come off mute and raise your hand. Not seeing anything else. So I will share is I will sort of double down on Victor, sort of like really kind of understanding what it is that you're getting and really understanding the problem that you are trying to solve. I think the thing I heard probably most often at the city was like, we tried that 10 years ago before you even came here and it didn't work. And so for me, before starting anything new, I think it's really important to, again, not reinvent the wheel, but also have that contextual understanding of like, why, like what made it not work in the past. And that's certainly something that I've brought into the practice of all the discovery efforts I have done when we start off a new modernization initiatives, really just understanding was there something in the past that sort of tried to solve the same problem? Where did it stall? What was a factor in that? And how does the environment look a little bit different now? Or what do we use differently to kind of get around that challenging area? Most often, I would say at my time in the city, this was often a people overlooking either an effort that was, existing in another part of the organization. And so it was a little bit of a duplication of efforts, or it was not enough authentic key stakeholder engagement before you started down a road. This is where I preach working in Agile and being as nimble as possible and not trying to spend a whole lot of time building something and trying to roll something out without doing all that critical work of developing that problem statement, vetting that around, getting that feedback, engaging critical stakeholders before you proceed to the next step in execution. Jeff?
Well, we too are in the process of awarding it for a new ERP. So it's interesting. And just some advice there. We spent 4 days in a row for each firm in the product demonstration side to really gain a good understanding. And even that felt short. When they initially said we need about 4 days, I was taken back. So it really was about 4 days. My biggest concern, and I don't know how others have handled this, is, we're bringing on a new solution and we're expecting the new solution to do new things. The big concern is how do we keep ourselves from reverting back to our old ways and actually utilizing the new tools? So anybody has advice there, that'd be good.
Yeah, that is, I think Linda said it in the chat, that is a great question. I would be curious to empower someone on the line if you have a perspective on that before I give my own. If there's anyone brave enough to chime in. Looks like Samantha would love some advice too. Yeah, I think Jeff, this is probably the key change management question. It's like, it is the key change management question is you spend a lot of time, you spend a lot of money, you roll something out. How do you make sure that people adopt it? My perspective on this is where, in order, it's one thing to do the due diligence to make sure that you're procuring a solution that works for your enterprise, your organization. It's entirely another thing that I think sometimes is often a backdrop, and someone pointed out ProSci, and I'm happy to link to some of the resources that they have available, but that engagement of critical stakeholders and really that development of, sometimes we call it a case for change, statement, which includes things that are benefits in change management. It's what's in it for me, a WIFM statement for each of your stakeholder types. You really need to get people's buy-in early and continue to engage people throughout the way, basically to make the case that the new thing that you're rolling out is going to be better for them, is going to make their lives easier, is going to improve X, Y, and Z factor for them, and really bring them along in the process. And so this is really, from an IT implementation standpoint, this is where I think a lot of things can sometimes fall apart. You have a system, you're bringing it in, you're integrating, there's maybe a core group of people who are working on it, and there isn't necessarily that buy-in from the other users of the system. And so figuring out for your agency, entity, department, organization, what it looks like to bring people in early and often is really, really important. The first time people are hearing about a change or a modernization initiative should not be like at the launch. There should be a lot of pre-launch activities. You should have a good pulse on the people, the users that you're expecting to use this system. So again, ProSci has a lot of great resources around like how to do low-level, quick stakeholder assessments, really trying to understand some of that stakeholder sentiment, understand some of the challenges people might be bringing. You know, really what you're trying to do is understand why people would not want to do, adopt a new solution, or what might prevent adoption. And that will likely look different based on the stakeholder groups that you're working with. So having a number of benefit statements, having some ways to bring people in. I think Erin pointed out executive sponsorship. That's really critical here too. And again, the emotion of change. This is a very timely topic for me personally, but change happens and change elicits a lot of emotion. And I think sometimes people just need this time and space to process that. We did fireside chats. I was rolling out an initiative at the VA that was really drastically upgrading an experience that had a 20-year-long history at the VA and had many internal staff folks who were obsessed with this tool. And we were dramatically changing it based on feedback from veterans and sort of where things were going from a cybersecurity perspective. And boy, did people, I think a lot of people recognize that we were taking steps to make a platform more secure and more user-friendly, but there was a lot of emotion behind people who had been there for when the VA had built and rolled out this tool 20 years ago. And so creating spaces for people to kind of process emotion and making people feel like they are truly part of what you are doing and not just a consumer of what you are doing is what I would share in this space.
Perfect. Yeah, we've been doing most of that. So that's good to hear. The fear is still there, but it's good to hear that we are on the right track to mitigate as best as possible.
Awesome. Great. So let's jump into my next slides here. And we want to just give you a little bit of insight about some of the assessment results. So this assessment has been live for a little bit now. We've been working on collecting feedback. And on the next couple of slides, we'll kind of give you all a debrief on the analysis of the modernization assessment. And we're kind of like structuring these based on response rate here. So the first kind of category here is document management. So while adoption of electronic document management is growing, we found that many of our respondents are still using some element of a hybrid process. So about 67% of folks were either between stage 2 and stage 3 when it comes to their document management kind of solution. About 27% of people were still using paper copies of procurement documents, and over 72% of folks were at least scanning documents to store and save them for future reference. So this is a growing, kind of evolving area of our maturity model. On the next slide, you're going to see kind of our next stage here, which is sourcing management. This is our most mature category. Most respondents have taken at least some steps to digitize sourcing. But again, we're still seeing that hybrid process or, sort of having to balance those generic or legacy technologies are still impacting here. So about 44% of respondents rated that they were at the enhanced level or above. About 43% of folks said yes or somewhat to submitting or accepting bids manually. 67% of folks were either primarily or partially using their ERP for procurement activities. And about 62% of folks did not have a clearly established strategic sourcing framework. So while it's mature, there's still some work kind of to be done in this space as well. On the next slide, you'll see we're going to talk about kind of our next topic of data management. So this is an evolving topic here in the space of public procurement, but the majority of governments who have taken our maturity assessment have been focusing on enhancing their data management processes. So 83% of our respondents were either entirely or partially recording procurement decisions manually in spreadsheets. About 78% of folks indicated that they were continuously enhancing their processes, looking to best practices, trying to apply those in their space. 35% of respondents were using a coding structure to classify requests and purchases, but only 22% of respondents were confident that their system could inform decision-making through some of that advanced business intelligence. So this is sort of the data is an evolving field. The more mature you are here, the more you're able to take that next step of not just only understanding what's happening, but using that data to inform your decision-making capabilities. Next slide, please. Supplier management. So the majority of our respondents here said that their supplier management processes have matured, but few have adopted solutions that really deliver that strategic value. So 73% of folks were either fully or somewhat managing supplier information manually. 19% of folks had adopted the ability to use supplier performance scores in their bid evaluation. 16% of respondents were confident in their ability to track and report on supplier vendor performance. And almost 2/3 of the respondents used email as a primary form of communication for procurement activities. So again, this is evolving, but sort of folks are a little bit in many places here in the space of supplier vendor management. On the next slide, we're going to talk about contract management, which was the lowest mature category across this assessment. So while digital contract solutions are still new, the adoption of solutions is still quite low among kind of those in public procurement. So 59% scored in either the basic or developing category here. About 86 respondents, percent of respondents either don't or can only somewhat proactively track contract performance, compliance, and spending to help inform decision-making. 32% of respondents were using spreadsheets and calendars as a primary way to manage contract reminders, and only 8% of respondents have adopted those AI solutions to help generate and review contracts. So again, there's, I think, lots of room in this space to continue to grow in maturity around contract management. I think those are all. Oh yeah, I think we're at a poll here. So I am particularly curious to hear from you. Please do use the chat on this one. For those of you who are engaging in modernization efforts, and those of you who would like to, what's one area that you would most likely transform in the next 12 to 24 months? So everything from document management, sourcing, data, supplier, vendor management, contract management, or are you ambitious and want to tackle all of these things? Lots of contract management coming in. That makes a lot of sense to me based on the data we've collected in the maturity model. Right. Some document management as well. Cool. All right, so let's jump in and sort of talk about kind of where you go from here. So we've talked about the model, we've talked about the results, like what are some things you can take away as you're thinking about or beginning to engage in modernization. So on the next slide, we have a couple of strategies and tips for you all to consider in this space for rapid modernization. And again, rapid, I think, is a loose term. It can look however it may need to look for your organization. But what we really have noticed and what we have done a lot of digging and data collection on is that we know that time to value is really critical, particularly in procurement modernization. So the faster you're able to realize the benefit of a new system or a streamlined process or an automated process, the sooner that you can enhance efficiency, reduce costs, improve service delivery, the better. It's really essential to demonstrating the value of kind of doing the modernization work and doing, as Jeff pointed out, some of the hard, scary work of trying to change something. So getting to those results as quickly as possible is really essential. And for me, I would say this is pretty much something that we've done a lot in my experience. Like, start small. Like, what's your low-hanging fruit? What's one thing that you might be able to do to demonstrate that value that maybe can then help you get that level of executive buy-in that you need? I will share a story from my experience that we, when I was at the city, we undertook a project to really streamline our vendor payment process, not only to primes, but insofar as primes then paid their subs, who were most likely small, local, minority, women, disabled-owned businesses. And this was a project that had lots of starts and stops before it came to my desk. And our chief administrator was like, you got to show me that this is a space where we can build some momentum. So identifying one piece of the process to quickly try to improve was my sort of ticket into getting her engagement and her more top-level executive buy-in, so that we could really dive deep and really tackle that process. Next is sort of thinking about, like bringing your people in early. Who are your people who are going to be supporting this? Who are your people who are really enthusiastic about making change, who are willing to partner with you to lead the charge, who want to help you kind of adopt and drive this, who are going to give you that valuable feedback throughout the process? How do you bring those people in early and often and in ways that make sense? Really think about sort of how to improve and what those feedback loops look like. We talk about feedback quite a lot in change management, but like, you need to be able to have some mechanism for people to provide their feedback, to feel like they can share that out with you, whether it's a standing meeting or steering committee or something virtual, or just drop by my desk and tell me what you're thinking, whatever that looks like. But figuring out what it will look like for you to collect that feedback and then actually make that feedback actionable as you are doing your modernization effort is really, really important. Thinking about, again, training and change management, all of this really hinges on bringing the people along the journey with you. You may be doing a procurement system modernization, and that's, it's a system based, but people are the consumers, the users, and the folks who are really critical in that system. So bringing people along, making sure you have really clear messaging around the benefits, why you're doing this, what it will mean, what your expected outcomes are, and making sure that you have mechanisms to help sort of reduce that resistance to change, have a smooth transition, and then tapping your champions into that so that they can continue to be your advocates on the ground in your own teams is really, really important. And then finally, really thinking about the integration in a unified system. So really trying to think about how your modernization is either going to plug in to other key platforms, what those integrations will look like, how do you make the case for a reduction in manual work and errors, and really make sure that what you're doing is aligned to organizationally where your organization is going. On the next slide, we also have a couple of kind of tips for leapfrogging. So you may be at stage 2 right now, but like maybe you really quickly want to get to stage 4 instead of going through 3. Can you do that in the maturity model? And the answer is, yeah, there's definitely some tactics that you can use to skip ahead. And you may not be starting from stage 1, or you may be able to kind of quickly move through the levels of the maturity model. One place where we see this happening quite often is leveraging cooperative contracts to bypass stages of the maturity model, because these often provide pre-established, ready-to-use procurement frameworks, can reduce that time and effort required to implement new systems and processes, reduce the time to, try to put out an RFP. So again, like a traditional RFP can take anywhere from 3 to 9 months. Cooperative contracts can really streamline that down to maybe a month or 2. So these reductions are really critical, especially if your organization is facing budget constraints or staff reductions. So really thinking about how cooperative contracts can play into this space. Really also thinking about sort of the fact that you may experience top-down executive pressure to really mandate rapid modernization. I will say in federal service, this has been my experience in the agencies I worked for, that a political appointee or a career senior executive would say, I want to see this done. This is it. This is the team. figure it out, my friends. And, they're really sort of setting the tone and then putting the resources beyond. And that level of executive pressure may actually help you sort of skip ahead in some of the stages to be able to move really quickly. And so again, sort of in this scenario, I think this is where those change management practices and really deep and thoughtful engagement of stakeholders is going to be really pivotal to moving through some of these stages really quickly. And I think I saw lots of this in the chat, but really think about who you're partnering with, and partnering with a vendor that understands your unique challenges and is really committed to your long-term success can really help enable rapid progression through the maturity model. So vendors that are providing tailored solutions, have ongoing support, are really going to be there as a partner to you all, is one way where you can kind of skip ahead and move really quickly here. So on our next slide, I think I'm getting to the end of my speaking portion here, but we do have, you should be able to scan this handy dandy QR code that will take you directly to the maturity assessment to see where you stand. Again, I said this at the top of the call. It really a great tool. I think it took me about like 10 minutes to complete, and you get a really nice customized report that sort of sums up your results and sort of what you might be able to do with your results. So really encourage, if you haven't taken this, I think it is a really great tool just to sort of gut test where you are, or maybe you've already done some of the work I did where you've done this work manually and you want to kind of like vet our assessment against what you've already done and sort of see what resonates. So starting with the maturity assessment, really great way to kind of take this presentation and sort of rapidly assess where you are and where you might want to make some additional investments, really doing things like engaging associations, contractors, vendors to help gain insights. I think Victor talked quite a lot about, what are other people's experiences in this space? What are people's experiences working with X, Y, and Z organization? I think a lot of that cross-community collaboration to really not only do your own due diligence, but really hear about other people's experiences are huge in this space. Thinking about a strategic roadmap, and when I say a strategic roadmap, I'm saying like, what are your small wins? How can you capitalize on small wins to get somewhere? So you may not either have the time, the staff, or the budget to be able to go really far or to leapfrog from 1 to 3, but what are some of the steps you can take to move from 1 to 2 on the maturity model? What are some things that are in your lows of control that you can start to make the case for change and start to get some of that executive level buy-in and secure that sponsorship? Again, I think this has been pretty prevalent in both the chat and in this conversation, but really investing in the change management resourcing, the training resourcing upfront as you're going through this effort before you even think about launching something officially, really trying to do that due diligence of bringing the right stakeholders around, identifying a champion network, being open and transparent about the benefits and the what's in it for me, for your different stakeholders and user groups, making sure people are as bought into this as possible will only help aid in your modernization effort. And then, of course, as with anything, really monitoring your progress and adapting. So you may start off on a journey, and something may happen and you need to pivot, and so having a little bit of foresight in how you might pivot or what it looks like to pivot, or just some of your in your back pocket in case you need to go a different direction, thinking about what it looks like to adapt as early as possible. Worst case scenario, you never use it. Best case scenario, something changes and you have to rapidly change your deployment and you are ready to kind of pivot in a new direction fairly seamlessly or without a ton of pain. So that's kind of a little bit about where we see this. Again, if you didn't click the QR code, I think Blake has put the link in the chat. Also on the next slide, you'll see he's also put the maturity model report link in the chat as well. So if you're interested in reading a little bit more about the insights that we've gathered by doing this maturity assessment and kind of taking in and analyzing those results, you can navigate to the report and really hear more about each of the insights we've learned about each stage of the model and what it looks like to navigate through the maturity model. And we'll also make sure that these links are available to be shared out with you all after today's call. So I think with that, I am at the end of my prescribed slides, and I'm happy to pause and see if folks have other questions that haven't already been raised.
Jeanette, looks like we have a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to read that yourself or you want me to read it out loud.
Yeah, I'm happy to read it. So question, referring back to the earlier poll on what stage we think we're at, what transition from one stage to the next do you feel is the hardest and why? And what suggestions would you make to your younger self if you could, when you were planning and moving up to make it any easier? Wow, this is a great question, Victor. I think multiple questions in one. I am curious, Blake, if you are willing to come off, because I know you've been tracking on some of these results, if you have perspective based on the data about what step might feel the hardest and why, and then I'm happy to share my perspective and hear from others as well.
Yeah, I think there's two ways to approach this. I think technically the hardest change between stages is probably the 5 to 6, just because that really is such an optimized and continuous improvement end state, which is probably not a good way to say that, but continuous improvement. So to me, I think that's the one where we've probably seen the least amount of traction is that stage 6. From a psychological perspective, I would say probably that stage 1, stage 2, and trying to get into the more digitized stage 3, stage 4 area, because it is just such a drastic change of the way things are done from a manual state to a much more kind of digital first state. So I don't know if that's a cop-out to say 5 to 6. That's why I added in the other one. But 5 to 6, you are definitely getting some very, very, very advanced solutions in place. So to me, from a technical aspect, that's probably the hardest. From a more change management aspect, I think trying to get past those first 2 stages is probably a difficult one.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think, both from my personal work in the city and the work I did in the federal space, really like getting people to either completely off of paper, which was there was so much paper people brought. We manually counted like 500-page like construction bids, like these, and people had to bring them in triplicate. And there was a special box on the 6th floor, and then I would interview people and ask how long it would take them to manually tabulate all of those things and make sure nothing was missing and make sure the right people who needed to look at the documents before we could even proceed had looked at it. Like it was hours and hours and hours. And, people would often say, oh, so-and-so was out of the office for a week. And so the documents just sat on her desk because, they sit at her stage until, she is back. So I think definitely moving from anything manual into anything digital is probably the hardest for people, and probably where you will face the most resistance. That being said, I think when you get to those middle layers, when you're maybe rolling out or your organization has like an ERP, but you're realizing you maybe need something that's more specific to meet your needs in the procurement space, I think trying to figure out how to navigate that conversation, particularly in these budgetary days, dare I say, I think is particularly challenging. And I think some of the advice to maybe make that easier is to really do your homework. I think, Victor, you said it before, like you really need to hone in on the problem that you're trying to solve. And for sort of those higher levels of maturity, I think being prepared to answer, why is it that you can't use what we already have to solve this problem? Like, what are we missing that's pushing you to do something beyond? Why is this worth the investment? I think is like the number one thing. I've certainly had to like go toe to the line to like advocate really hard for like why we needed a different type of solution than we had in our enterprise. So I think for me, that's my advice, is really thinking about like, what is your problem and why is it that what exists is not solving your problem? And like, how would you be able to solve your problem? And then pairing that with the homework you've done to say, hey, this is going to be worth the investment we're making. This is going to make us more efficient. This is going to impact our organization. And then, I think this is my selfish perspective, but we did a ton of vendor engagement with the city and really like trying to redefine what it looked like to work with the city for our small local vendors. Like, it's so hard, and really thinking about procurement as a tool to really help build up like engagement from the local community in procurement initiatives, and really thinking about how some technology can really help drive that. Like, you know, the 10-person mom and pop shop is not printing out 500 pages in triplicate to drop off to be considered as a vendor on, you know, like a big project. And, you know, like technology isn't going to solve that. Technology may lower that barrier to entry, and having something that's really customized and something that speaks to their needs is only a benefit to the folks on the government side of being able to get more people, more local people, more people engaged, and really lower that sort of scary barrier to entry about how hard it is to work in the space of public procurement, how hard it is to work with government. So that is sort of what I would say in terms of like both level and sort of advice I would give my naive younger self moving in the into the procurement space for the first time.
I'd also just add to that too, which is something that I know kind of goes against the normal processes, but just celebrating small wins along the way. You know, everybody, you know, we get caught up into the, you know, until every box is ticked, you know, until we're at that, you know, ideal end state, you know, we can't celebrate anything. And the fact is, you know, I remember reading some of the comments through here. I mean, it's a journey, and it's a constant journey. So if you wait till that perfect end state to celebrate, you know, that day may never come. So I think that's probably, you know, looking back at things, and, you know, I guess it was looking back at your younger self. That's really, I think, what it is just taking the time to, you know, celebrate it. It's, you know, day in, day out, there's stresses, there's constant changes, there's everything. I mean, just any progression is something that's worth celebrating. So I think that's, you know, take a moment, pat yourself on the back, pat others on the back. I think it's very important to take that time.
The other thing I will just chime in, because I saw, you know, someone from Seattle posted in the chat about COVID, but like, I also think part of the why I am so deeply invested in sort of the people aspects of this and the doing your homework aspect of this is like, the more prepared you are, like when something major happens, you can pivot and you've already done the work, or you've already maybe mapped out where you want to go. So like in our vendor payment project, we were doing a pilot. I was out on maternity leave, COVID hit, and all of a sudden I was like quickly spinning back in so that we had a way to pay people when we couldn't have people go into the building and cut checks from a system that is older than I am. So like we had that pilot, we had done our homework, we knew it was going to work. We had already gathered some early data. Was it scary to roll it out quickly and not in the way we expected? Yes. But did it help make sure that we were able to keep things operational when we had to pivot? Yes. And that's quite an extreme example, but I think that is why you do a lot of this work on the front end, to really understand your context and understand your use case and understand your problem so that you're really ready for whatever might be coming down the line.
Any other questions? We got a couple minutes here, so we're going to wrap up. So I guess any last questions before we wrap up is what I should be saying. Well, thank you, Jeannette and Blake, for being here today with us. I did do the assessment last summer, and it was really, really helpful to give a roadmap to my supervisors to show where we were. And it's outside. I think we all deal with this. We can talk as much as we can because we know what we're doing, but if we can get a third party to verify what we just said, all of a sudden our credibility gets a little bit better. So thank you for that. We really appreciate you guys coming. Hopefully you have everything. We did upload this copy of the slides to the Washington State chapter of NIGP's document section. If you are a non WANIGP member, if you want to go ahead and email me, I will send you a PDF of those as well. So, because I know not everybody if you're not a member, you don't get access to our documents behind the scenes. So there's my emails in the address, in the chat there. So anything else before we wrap up? I see a lot of thank yous in the chat for you.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is great, y'all.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Have a fantastic rest of your week and have a fantastic May. And for those of you who are joining us in June for our next Lunch and Learn on software, sourcing or procurement. We will see you then on June 3rd. And for those of you who are not WANIGP members, you're welcome to join us on that one as well. Just go to the WANIGP website and sign up.